So, thank you so much for coming to this third and final episode of our what I call deep dive into Samson. I know that I'm targeting a lot of people that maybe have not heard the entire story of Samson, and that's really what the goal was for this. And really, the goal for our channel is to reach out to those that might not have interest in reading their Bible. We want to give reasons for them to read the Bible, and we're going to read parts of it, the ones that maybe people have heard of, because that's why a lot of fear comes to many of us, that they don't get into the Bible because they feel like they're not worthy of reading the Bible, or they have no interest, that they think that the Bible is boring. But we're finding parts of the Bible that are very, very interesting. And what that means is that we want to give you a reason to go back and fill in what we missed. So take that into consideration. I know, some people might, hear the word deep dive, and then it doesn't get as deep as they want it to be, and then they feel disappointed. And that's not the case. I really want to have more of a discussion and reading God's word, and I want to leave God's word to be able to convict people, and also let God's words do its job, because it's not me that's going to cultivate the change in your heart. It's going to be God cultivating that change. So let's let God's word do its work, and we're going to finish where we left off. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we got. We're going to start where we left off, and that was around verse 13. So I want to do a little bit of an overlap, and then we'll continue on. In the background, I don't know if you noticed Mario back there, but he's kind of slouching a little bit. Get him upright a little bit. So hopefully he's doing a little better back there. All right. So verse 13, agreed, they answered. Because remember, they tied him up. They're going to tie him up, and they're going to give Samson over to the Philistines. And this where the story's climax is, okay? Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. And as he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. Wouldn't that be really cool to find the jawbone of that donkey that he killed those men with? That would be the archaeological find of the century, to find something like that. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given me, your servant, this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Remember, the uncircumcised are the Philistines. Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. What an amazing act of God. He cried out directly to God, and God gave him what he needed. Then God opened up the hollow place, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute, and he went in to spend the night with her. So we're already there. Now we're starting to see what's happening to Samson, because Samson's human, right? He's been granted strength above all of our understanding, right? But he still has weaknesses, just like we have weaknesses. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." That's such a weird question. Like, if my wife came up to me and asked me such a question, that would be so weird. But it's the weakness that we're coming to, and you're going to see a little bit of association here in just a second. Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." So there he goes. He lied. He lied to Delilah. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me and lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes and that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with him. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me, telling me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into fabric, and tightened it with a pin. Again, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when you won't confide in me?" Every time he confides in her, the Philistines come and he breaks through everything. Why would he sees what's happening, right? He knows that she's betraying him, but she doesn't see it either. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. How many times does that happen in our life? So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again, and after it had been shaved. So you see how it was the discipline. It was the discipline to not shave your head, and he gave in to the nagging. He gave in to the nagging, and how does that associate to real life? That associates to real life because the devil can nag us. The devil can nag us with the same thing over and over again because the devil knows exactly your weaknesses, right? He knows exactly what the last thing that you failed at. He knows exactly the last thing that got you to fail God, right? The things that God says don't do, the devil pushes us and then we do it. Right? We give in to those weaknesses over and over and over again. And it was that discipline that we see that was broken because he was nagged and he finally just gave in. And what happens? It says that the Lord had left him. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." Because you got to understand that the Philistines did not believe in God. They believed in a god called Dagon, and they also believed in some other gods as well. And you can actually read a little bit more about it on your own. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servants who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I may lean against them." Now, the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. So you got to think all the political powers of the Philistines were in this building together. Because we have to remember that we're not going to get through life without fulfilling the purpose that God's given us. Regardless of our bad or our terrible mistakes, God has a purpose for us that was given to us before birth. He will fulfill those purposes. Whether we're blinded, they said they gouged out his eyes. He's blind. He's blind and has no strength, but he's going to fulfill God's purpose. And you're going to watch. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me." That's said a lot in the Old Testament. Our people cry out to God. It says, "Please remember me." Remember that when you're praying. Please, God, strengthen me just once more and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. So if we could take this screen and we're in the 2 pillars and we're pushing them apart, just like that. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all of his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Remember all the people, just in that one swoop, it said that when he killed them with the donkey jawbone, he killed just 1,000 men just that time. And it says that he killed many more this day than he did while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. So you see, and you can put together this character that God gave us in reading about Samson. Now, there's much more to the book of Judges than just this, but too often we hear this story of the hair, right? Samson had great strength because of his hair. And when you start to delve into God's word and you've never done it before, you've got to be able to pull out some of these and make them come to life. That's what a big thing when I started reading the Bible, I had to I took a script that God given me, right? The Bible, and I turn it into a movie in my mind. You have to bring these characters to life because they were once walking this earth just like you. So you have to remember that this isn't fairy tales. This is the historical writings of the Bible, that this happened. And you have to put it into that perspective. I hope and I pray that God convicts you with this to want to read the whole story. This is just one piece of the Old Testament that I think a lot of people can put into what's happening in our world today. We can see leaders of our world, our leaders like we see in the Bible. They have problems. They're human. They have issues. But sometimes God gives power to judges in this world to do his purpose and to fulfill prophecies. So use this as a stepping stone to go into the book of Judges and read it on your own. I pray that you enjoyed this, and I hope and pray that you hit the subscribe button, follow for more. I would love to do these as much as possible. And please put in the comments down below the next story that you would like me to read. God bless you, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas.